Everyone. Happy Halloween. I was going to post this tomorrow, but I thought why not be fun and do a Halloween article discussion. So I'm wearing my classic giraffe onesie. It is a tradition in my family to wear animal onesies for Halloween. My brother started it, and the tradition lives on. So this week's articles were pretty interesting. The first one about the conversation between Picasso and Brock. My first kind of reaction to starting this article was just like, my goodness, artists are so fickle. They have such big personalities, and there's such an accuracy in timelines. I feel like I've seen that phrase itself occurring so many times in our readings alone. And it's kind of interesting too with the timing of the two artists and their what we call friendship, I guess. I'm actually wondering if it's more of a working relationship because they were really only friends for as long as Cubism was at the height of its popularity or the height of its use. It kind of feels like once it sort of slowed down, they kind of went their separate ways when they realized they were kind of looking at different parts of Cubism or at least focusing on different aspects. Um, so I thought that, seeing the way that both of those artists went about incorporating different materials, different, subject matters, different styles, was pretty indicative of, their, I guess, contribution to the movement as a whole. I don't know, it was kind of cool. So I liked one quote that I found as well on page 9. All solutions were tested, broken apart, and bounced off one another for the thing to come together as Cubism. And that kind of just feels like what Cubism is as well. Like that process for how they got to it is like literally what Cubism is. I also thought it was really interesting that the article pointed out that it was not, the movement was not just a bunch of cubes, as many people kind of, assume. It's a misnomer. So I thought that clarification was kind of like nice for like the layman. And so I thought it was also really interesting that, in trying to break down what Cubism is that it's the projection of forms, almost like bas relief versus high relief. So I think of like, two parts of the Parthenon, for example, on the Acropolis. The Ionic frieze in the slight interior, that is a very low relief carving of the Panathenaic festival or parade, while on the pediments of the building, those objects are very high relief. So that's kind of where my brain went when thinking about Cubism. I also think it's kind of interesting that it seems almost like Matisse actually named Cubism, or was the first person to kind of give it that title, which then kind of went forth from there. And then I also, I was very appreciative of the fact that the author explained a little bit more about the two different types of Cubism between analytic and synthetic, with analytic being form focused and synthetic being more focused on color. Though it is really interesting to read about how, the two artists, Picasso and Brock, in their friendship, in their working relationship as artists developing this new form of art, they wanted to tackle the forms first, which gives reason to why the colors are so, deep and like muddy. That gives me a little bit more clarity. I teach about the Portuguese by Brock in my AP Art History class at the high school level, and their first comment is like, ugh, I don't like the color. I don't really get it. I don't see it. I don't understand what's going on. And until you break down Cubism or explain it a little bit more, I think it's hard to have an appreciation for it sometimes, though it seems to be, in my opinion, one of the more popularly recognized movements of the 20th century. I thought it was really important that the author tracked the history and the movement of the actual trend itself. And it was also really interesting to see the comparison between like the Cubists and the old master subjects. I find it so interesting that like all art seems to go back to like ancient classical era of Greece and Rome and the Renaissance. I wonder, maybe like 200, 300, 400 years from now, what's going to be like that next thing that we go back to? Like what art movement either, will be realized or has yet to come that will be as momentous as those two. I also thought that the article really provided a lot more clarity on how Picasso utilized the different mediums, trying to work in 3D sculpture, and like his kind of incorporation of collage, while Braque used papier collé. I think that's French, and I think I'm pronouncing it really wrong. But I thought, those two different formats are like very similar but very unique, and they bring different aspects to each of their individual each individual artist's work. And that kind of ending comparison of stability versus uncomfortable is almost like that comparison between Braque and Picasso. So overall, seeing that conversation between the two, I think, is really important to understanding the movement a little bit better. Knowing something's origin story feels like, to me, it has more purpose, more lore, more depth and complexity to it. I kind of have more of an appreciation. I sort of get it a little bit more maybe than I previously did. Now, the next reading that I chose to do was on Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And this was an interesting article. It started out really interesting and positive to me, lost me somewhere in the middle, and then I found the path again and kept on with the journey. I had to read that middle part again. So I really, there's a lot of mixed opinions about this picture by Picasso. It's another one of the pieces in my AP Art History curriculum, and I have also seen it at the MoMA. It's larger than you think it would be. I don't know why. A lot of pieces tend to be larger than you realize, and this was definitely one of those for me. I thought that the beginning of the article was very interesting in how it presented this picture, because it described it in so many different negative and positive ways. It was, inventive, but also monstrous, and violating and attacking, but also the true, 20th century painting. There's a lot of descriptive words combined into there, and I think that kind of reflects its reception by the audience as well. And so I like that the author of this article really clarified that they're not going to be looking at the perception of this piece from the male point of view, which is kind of, it seems like, where a lot of that analysis has started and ended, but from the unanticipated viewers of this piece. I thought the author was really thorough in providing a little bit more backstory, let us know their own point of view and kind of where they're coming from. So that way we can either take their thoughts with a grain of salt or really digest and invest in what they're saying to us. Giving that opportunity for a viewer to have their own understanding of this work was really important for me. I think it's interesting to consider the concept of appropriation, and who is being almost mocked as a result of Picasso's use of these masks. Is it the clients? Is it the women themselves? Is it the continent of Africa and all of the artwork that comes from it? That's really complex. And so, there is a lot of also comparison to Olympia that the artist chose to do by Manet. And I think that's a very interesting comparison, because that was also a very unexpected and important moment in art history that revealed something that was not normally, I guess, part of the public eye. And so, it definitely relates on both of those pieces relate on the same level of its specifications in terms of sex and the details that are also then incorporated into Picasso's work, as well as Manet's, and the idea of the lady of the night. So there was definitely a very deep discussion on sex represented in all art. Some surprising quotes from some surprising figures. I'm thinking of the words from Renoir, Rothko, and Picasso himself. To read some of those quotes was, I was just a little taken aback. It was on my lunch break. So, I really thought that, it was kind of interesting to kind of understand if, the male gaze isn't being driven towards this piece, then, what is the interpretation by that audience member? Who is that person? If it's not kind of looking at it with that, again, the male gaze, is it now fear and that worrisome that worry of the outsider, as Picasso supposedly was considering, or what people have kind of interpreted as, especially this author. I think the inconsistency of the reactions in the beginning of the analysis is definitely due to the display inconsistencies. It was on display, it was, taken off display for a while, now it's in a prominent museum of modern art, and so it's kind of a very complex and multi-level journey that it's been on in terms of how the public is receiving it. And I thought this really interesting quote from page 607. It is hailed as the first Cubist painting during a period when its subject matter was scarcely mentioned. So I think it's really interesting how Picasso made such a bold statement, maybe not even fully intending to do so the way that he did, in a, I guess, technique that wasn't as commonly used. So I thought that it was definitely important for me to kind of read this article and understand a little bit more about Picasso and his process. I don't have the highest opinion of him as a person and an artist. So I pushed myself to read this article because I felt like I wanted to understand a little bit more about him and maybe find some way to sort of appreciate his art in a different light, which I think I do now as well. There's a lot of very complex comparisons and of opposites in this article as well as the first one, and I thought it was really interesting to read a little bit more about Picasso's process after reading both Picasso and Braque. So I would love to also read an article that goes into Braque's process a little bit more, so maybe I have an appreciation for his work. And so that I think it's interesting too, considering the audience of Les Demoiselles d'Avillon, and whether you feel that sense of empowerment, you feel that sense of fear, you feel that sense of uneasiness, the harshness, but also like the warmth of the body positioning, are these women a seasoned pro? Are these women very angry? Are they very, upfront, abrasive? It is a piece that can be interpreted in many different ways. So it was a very important exploration of interpretation that the author took. And I'm glad I got to read it. So in kind of summation of these two articles, Cubism is not something that, again, has always been my favorite movement, but I think knowing more about it gives you more appreciation. One of my coworkers has always said she never really loved Rococo art until she learned more about it. So maybe this is kind of one of those moments for me. I'm really interested to hear what everyone else has to say. I'm working on the other articles for other article discussion, and I will hopefully have that posted soon. And I hope everybody had a very spooktacular Halloween. Got my giraffe onesie on right now, but my art department at the high school I teach at, we were all the Pac-Man and Ghost characters today. So I was the orange one, Clyde. So I walked around the building going waka waka waka. Anyway, have a lovely holiday, everybody. Stay safe. Bye.